Okay, if you have topics today, now's the time to drop them in before we get up and running. I was just taking care of an item. So as we've transitioned and now have, well, quite a few, what is layer 5 has, I think 5 GitHub orgs, but one of which is private, the other 4 of which are public. And there's a bit of information that Nikhil had posted about that here on the Discuss forum. So just for familiarity, just in that, like, hey, we'd been doing lots of things out of layer 5 IO, that org, and that still continues to be an org we use fairly heavily. It's, an org for emerging, new projects. We're to start there, and maybe they get moved out into something else. 2 of them were donated to the CNCF recently, so we broke them into their own orgs. So Service Mesh Performance, it contains, really a single repo that has a website and the specification. Meshery broken out into its own org that has a lot of things, a lot of repos, Meshery and all of the components surrounding it. And then there's another one, Service Mesh Patterns. So if you've been on the calls over the last X number of months, you will have heard us talking about patterns and how important they are to how Meshery is working and will continue to work. And they're really what we talked about on last call for this WebAssembly call as well. We talked about patterns and how those get used for here. So anyway, that's what that org is about. I was just doing some housekeeping briefly, updating some DNS records to try to ensure that each of these orgs and the associated domain lists as verified. Layer 5 IO. So this says verified right here, which is good. So, and I think we just verified Service Mesh Performance. It's not showing up though yet. But okay. So it says verified here. Okay, anyway, back to our regularly scheduled program. So we've got a number of folks. We have one of our pending topics is from Joshua of Oracle. Hopefully he's going to get clearance to speak about how they run Envoy. So is Joshua on? So he has shared this publicly a couple of meetings ago. So I think it's okay to repeat, and second of all, it's actually, I mean, there's nothing, there's no special sauce to this. So Joshua had attended one of the Istio workshops that I had delivered through O'Reilly, and was learning about Istio, and then he sort of learned about our community as part of that, and Meshery, and so this was, I don't know, 6 months or more ago, and so he's continued to kind of hang around. He works at Oracle, I think, here in the US. And a couple of meetings ago on WebAssembly, this WebAssembly filters call, he was saying that of the service mesh that they run, it's a custom rolled control plane, which is to say they have any number of Envoy proxies. And as they go to manage those proxies, they've got various scripts, whether it's Ansible or other things to help them, Salt or what have you, to help them to manage the Envoy configurations. They're using some amount of filters. And so they're interested in, or Joshua is interested in, what Meshery can do to help manage filters running in Envoy, even for lack of a separate service mesh control plane. So let me drive home what I'm speaking about to make sure that you guys all get it. So I think if you go to meshery.io and you look at the overview deck, yeah. Okay, this overview, this slide says, yep, here it is. So let me pause this. this slide here, hopefully this is large enough. In concept, service meshes are, what makes a service mesh? It's kind of two things: a data plane, a control plane. Data plane has, it's all these proxies running around handling traffic. They're the workhorse. They're doing the heavy lifting of looking at traffic, rerouting it, doing that kind of a thing. The control plane is, well, they vary. That's why there's a bunch of different service meshes. What those individual service meshes bring. Sometimes they use the same control plane component. Envoy is a popular control plane proxy, and so there's like 5 or so of these service meshes that use. There's a lot of service meshes that use Envoy. Depends on how you want to measure them. There's a lot, and Envoys, okay, so let me try not to explain the whole world. Let me just say that in some environments, people are not using a control plane. They have their own scripts, but they still want to be able to use something like Meshery to manage their filters. So whether they're running a well-known control plane, a console or a Linkerd, an Istio, or they're just have their own scripts, Meshery can not only interact with the control plane and assist in integrating, making it easier to run the service mesh and integrating the service mesh into their environment. Meshery can also manage directly either directly manage filters or indirectly manage filters by talking to the control plane and it in turn deploying filters. So it's a good distinction to note that there's sort of 2 paths to a management plane like Meshery, inserting and removing and updating and configuring filters in the data plane. The 2 paths are, the foremost path that we've been focused on is speaking to the control plane, having the control, informing the control plane that certain filters should be deployed to certain applications, certain services. In lieu of the ability, there's only one control plane out there today that has published support for dynamically inserting and removing Envoy filters, and that's Istio. Now, console, open service mesh, and some others, Kuma use Envoy as a data plane, but they've yet to expose support for WebAssembly, for like configuring WebAssembly filters. So in those environments and in environments where there isn't a control plane or one of those control planes that I just mentioned, Meshery the other path for Meshery to manage these filters is directly. I hope that conceptually makes sense, because that's a good backdrop to part of the discussions that we're having. And when and if we get Joshua back in to present, you'll have an understanding. So good. So we've been looking at the ways in which Meshery is able to manage filters today. And I'm going to pull up Meshery to help refresh our memories on that. But while that comes up, we do have a couple of topics. So one of those is from Gaurav. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Actually, Gaurav, I think you're going to accomplish the mission. If you end up showing Meshery, then you'll refresh everyone. So.
Yeah. Yep. So in the filter, what we have, the latest current option added to the filters UI is this is the bulk delete operation. So the user can delete multiple files at one go, multiple filter files. So I won't be deleting all of them now. So that feature that I've added yesterday. So talking about the Rgsf and the filter configuration. So in the previous call, I've showed you the draft PR for the Rgsf. So over that, we are still conflicting that how to proceed for the Rgsf one, because I have hard coded that thing and that is not required. So we'll be using the Rgsf for configuration of the filters, and the deploy functionality for the filters will also be added simultaneously.
So Utkarsh, feedback for Gaurav?
Yes, so what we have right now, I think that's good. The only thing is, I'm still not quite sure how we are going to pass the like what the user experience would be to pass the custom configuration for the thing, for the particular filter. Assuming that we will set up the rest of the on the filter configuration in Meshi server somewhere, but still the custom configuration, how that would be
Yep. For the
consumed.
custom configuration, what I showed previously was having a Rgsf form through we will be configuring all the filter types, for example, the rate limiter one. So what I have done for the UI is I've added a icon over here. So I think that icon should be present in each of the rows, so we can target a particular file for changing the configurations accordingly. So I think that would be achieved from the form itself.
Okay, so the form would need a JSON schema to
Yeah.
render itself. So basically, so the idea is that where we store on the filter and whatever provider persistence there, we will also store its JSON schema, like the configuration JSON schema. Is that the idea?
Yep, that's the idea.
Okay.
Okay, let me see if I can tee up this conversation a little bit more. So as Meshery goes to manage filters, there's a number of aspects to track about any given filter. When the filter is not deployed, there's lesser concerns, like lesser things to track. The things to track are the fact that there's a binary file. So that file has a file name. It has a timestamp of when it was uploaded, when it was last updated. It's just a binary file. So great, like, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to understand if you're going to upload a file to a system, then you want to be able to update it, delete it, that kind of a thing, rename it, maybe retrieve it. Great. So you need to be able to retrieve the binary. Okay. Sometimes filters also need to receive a runtime configuration specific to whatever it is that filter does. If that filter does rate limiting, then maybe you want to configure the rate limit to hit at a certain point, to stop at 100 requests per second. But that setting, 100 requests per second, that would be specific to Utkarsh's deployment, while it might be 200 requests per second for Gaurav's deployment. And so that configuration, it's not baked into the binary, it's separate and adjacent, but it's only specific to that filter. Like only that filter is the one that receives that configuration. Okay, fine. So there's a test filter, a Kuma test, and a rollout and Istio. Those three filters, they would have their own special config that potentially only that filter knows how to understand and use. Okay, so in terms of basic support for Meshery to provide, basic support that Meshery would need to provide is it needs to be able to do CRUD operations on a binary file, okay? And then accompanying that, CRUD operations on to use Utkarsh's terminology, he was saying custom configuration, so maybe 100 requests per second is kind of the example I was giving. That custom config, it's generally, to my knowledge anyway, it's generally not considered a separate file. Rather, it's a string of some arbitrary length that is, to Meshery, probably unbeknownst to Meshery, like what that specifically needs to be for that type of filter. Why? Because the filters, there isn't a standard descriptor of WebAssembly filters today. And so, so I think that string is just an attribute, just like timestamp. The custom config string, I think, is just in my mind, is just an attribute of the filter, the binary. Assuming that folks agree. And by the way, I sent a link to a Slack chat that sort of outlines what those attributes would be. Then good, that's enough to have basic support for statically being for Meshery being an artifactory, if you will, being a repository of filters statically without having deployed them yet. Utkarsh is taking us to the next step, which is, well, let's do something with these things. Let's go ahead and deploy them. And Gaurav has actions to deploy. Now, when you go to deploy them, there's a litany of other questions and configuration items that come into play. It's like, what service do you want to apply those to? Did you want to apply more than one filter? If so, what sequence did you want for those filters to be in? Which one receives the traffic first? What's the filter chain look like? There's a handful of other things to configure within there. And so, Utkarsh, would we expect then to have those other configurations described in pattern component format, such that in order for the user here to potentially go through answering a series of questions about, like, what does your filter chain look like? The things that I was just saying, like what service do you want to apply it to? What's the filter chain look like? What's the direction of the traffic, inbound, outbound? Would our expectation be that those would be described as pattern components, and that we would then display those components here when someone clicks deploy in like a modal?
Yeah, so those configurations are available in, like, they are configurable via patterns. So definitely a user can fill it in if they want to customize it. The other thing that I was proposing was, let's say we have a rate limit filter and we know that it should be on sidecar in inbound, not outbound. No, only in inbound, and what the location of it would be. So those kind of things can also be like stored in our attribute, that these are, so because they are special filters that we are providing, we know its configuration, we know where they're supposed to go. The only thing that we need to ask from the user in that case is actually on what application you actually want to like apply it. So if the filter is special, we can keep the configuration, those kind of configuration in the attributes. And if they're not, then definitely we are still capturing them in the patterns. So we can, a user is free to open up the Rgsf form and fill in the details as they please. So that was what I was basically suggesting.
It makes sense to me.
Yep. Sure.
And I think it makes sense to like 3 of the other people on the call. You know what I mean? And that's and the reason I'm pointing that out is to say, if that's the case, then we're not doing good, because there's a lot of us here that can be assisting, help, getting a piece of the action, so to speak. And so let's talk about getting, well, Shivai's fingers dirty if we can, or Suraj's and Mr. Surya Shankar's and etc. Meghana just did a nice number in a different area of the UI. So clearly she's ready for her next piece of the action. Okay, so let's see if we can dole out some of those areas that people can sink their teeth into. So one, I think it's in Meshery. If you go to the Meshery repo, there's a new issue, relatively new, I believe, that says for filters, and patterns and applications, it would be really nice if when someone downloads Meshery, there's a set of sample filters that they can pick from and use. They don't have to necessarily bring their own. They can bring their own. So if you go to the Meshery repo, should be a new issue. And it should be like, so Grav at the very top, be like just the regular Meshery repo. Yeah. Ooh, 803 stars. Oh, good. Yeah, okay, under issues. Right there, the very last issue includes sample filters in Meshery release. There you go. So this is scheduled for the next milestone, I mean, maybe we'll get it into the V060 release. By the way, right now, if you don't recall Meshery, we're on V05.x, and support for filters is, the initial support for filters is supposed to land in V060. So ideally, so there's a repository that we had started a long time ago. If you click that hyperlink, and we've discussed this repository on this call in the past, there's a repository of, there's an emergent collection of Envoy filters that have been created for people to use for different purposes. Well, it seems to me that, to help seed, we can seed a Meshery deployment with these filters and make it easier for people to derive value from Meshery more quickly. So how do we go about baking these into the build? So just like today, we ship sample applications. We do that as part of an adapter. And those sample apps, like in concept, what we're doing is in each Meshery adapter, like if there's the adapter is for Linkerd, there's a Linkerd sample application called Emoji Voto. We bundle in that application so that people can deploy Linkerd, deploy a sample app, test it out, get familiar with it. They can also take that Emoji Voto, the Linkerd sample app, they can also deploy it on top of Istio or Console or a different mesh. And that's very helpful because then people can see the differences using the same app. They can see the differences between how the different meshes work. Okay, good. Okay, so we bundle those sample apps in individual adapters. All right, that's our delivery mechanism for content, if you will. That's how we're doing content, or how we have been doing content. If Meshery, lets you bring your own filter, and if we bundle in content, filter content, where should we bundle that? So filters currently are, the idea with filters here, just like the sample apps, is that you can take, as long as the data plane is running Envoy, eventually Meshery will be able to, I shouldn't even say eventually, because I think it can do it basically today. It can insert filters into any Envoy-based data plane. So should we bundle up filters in a service mesh specific adapter? It seems a little not right. Okay, well, then if we bundle them up in Meshery server, that seems a little more appropriate. How can others on the call assist with that? It's a little bit of a build time, a little bit of a continuous integration question, potentially. It's also a question of there's a number of concerns as this comes forth, is like, if someone deploys Meshery and they don't like the filters, they want to delete them, fine. But when they upgrade to the next release, does that mean they get them back? It's like, well, without us discussing it much, they probably would get them back. It's a minor nuisance to just delete them again, no problem, or just don't use them, Okay. When someone updates to another version of Meshry and they have their own custom filters, do those get retained? It's like, well, depends on what provider they're using, but yes. Okay. So actually, it might be a very straightforward challenge, like Nivendu, Utkarsh, Udraksh. You guys think aloud, Ashish, think aloud about how it is that we would bundle in and ship those example filters. So literally in the CI build process, we would probably check out that other, if the Meshry CI is running, is building Meshry from the Meshry repo, reaches out to the Wasm filters repo, checks, clones that repo, grabs the binaries that are built to run in an Envoy or runtime, which are not specific to any given mesh. Now, eventually we might run into some hiccups where there's a specific, like for that version, for this filter, it requires a specific version of Envoy. There may be, in the future, there may be some, version dependencies we need to track, but ignoring that for now. Does anyone want to finish the thought that I was about to walk through with how to build in these filters, the binaries into a release? Because it's fairly straightforward. So I'm going to shame everyone on here if you can't think of it. Or I'll just embarrass myself for trying to make a joke. So I think that so there's something to do here for potentially two people. There's some work to be done in the build process. Part of the build process is checking out, getting that repo, pulling over the filters. The second part of that flow is to, well, probably just invoke Meshry. No, it's probably that when Meshry starts, it needs to source any, it needs to either have pre-registered these filters, which is not likely to be the case. Like that registration probably needs to happen on server start. Like while the binaries can be bundled physically in the same container image and be sitting there resident on that same container image so that we can support air gap deployments and that kind of a thing. There probably needs to be a routine that and there is a routine that invokes when Meshry first starts, the instance of Meshry server first starts. That in this case, we would add to that to say, look to the, look to see if there's any filters to load. Look to see if there were any that were shipped with the thing. Part of what I'm suggesting is a little bit short-sighted. It's aimed at supporting like an air-gapped style deployment, which is helpful. To expand on that a little bit, you could also say, well, doesn't that bloat the image size of the Meshry image, which is already too large? Like, yeah, not materially because the filters are pretty small, but point taken. And also, like maybe people just don't want them in the image and like they want to dynamically pull them in. And so it might be something like that we might want to make it easy to retrieve from the remote, like from that GitHub repo from here. Like, hey, if you want to, like there might be, there might be a filter hub, like, hey, point to the filter hub, pull down local filters that you can use, or here's a few URLs that you can pull from and make those readily handy. So there's a little bit of like aspirationally, I think that as a community, as a project, like part of our roadmap is to eventually probably have something of a filter hub. WebAssembly's been around for a few years, still quite early, stands to be a significant way of computing in the future. Stands to be quite popular. And so investing in this area to help people do very interesting things with service meshes has always been part of the goal. And so, having a hub like that where people can, it's not dissimilar from what we would do with patterns. So I don't want to monologue everyone, but to use patterns as an example, there's a book being written that has 30 to 60 something service mesh patterns. Like, how do you use service meshes very well, and how can you apply these patterns? Those patterns are going to go into that GitHub org that I was pointing out earlier, github.com/service mesh patterns. There'll be a public facing repository of these patterns for all to use, and Meshry as a system, you can quickly import those and put the patterns to use. Okay, well, it's the same dilemma, right? It's like, hey, do we pre-package, pre-bundle sample filters out of the box when you just start Meshry, or should we just make it really easy to pull from, a pattern hub, service mesh hub, if you will, pattern hub like that, to pull in patterns, to pull in filters. These are things that, these are things to consider. So I guess we didn't arrive, that brainstorming didn't arrive at us like a hard-nosed direction. Anybody have any thoughts?
I guess we can start with just like we are doing with pattern components and stuff. Initially, we can ship the sample filters in the image itself, and then implementing something on the server side so that they can be deployed easily. I'm not sure about the part that happens after that, but yeah, we can ship the sample filters in the Meshry server's image. The other idea, like pulling filters from a filter hub. That's future functionality, I guess.
Well, yeah, or there isn't a filter hub, but I'll let Utkarsh tell us about.
Yeah, so actually, I was suggesting that if we have if you're storing the WASM filters in a GitHub repository, so, and provided that Airgap deployment is not a issue for now. So what we can do is, because we have a worker, let that work on that repository, grab all the filters when the Meshry server boots up, upsert into the database, upserting because, and basically the idea is that if the user deletes it, mark it delete, don't delete it. So that when Meshry server, if updates happen, then also it's marked delete, but we still update the filter. The user doesn't see it because they deleted it. But again, this assumes that WASM filters are in a repository, are being kept in a repository, and air-gap deployment is not an issue.
Yeah, I think that there are some quick, there's some easy steps to potentially do now. So Gaurav, so in the UI, you can click the upload the filter and you'll get a browse interface to retrieve from your local system. That's good, that works. But it's also, Meshry is more capable than that. You can give Meshry an HTTP URL, which can be to any HTTP available file, and it would pull it in. You could also give it a github.com URL. It'll walk through that repo. We haven't exposed that in the UI, it seems. So Gaurav, so here we go. So Meghana, like here's something to be done in the UI. And Abhi, who's on the phone as well, is, hey, who all, Gaurav, if you go to the WASM Filters meeting minutes, we can be inspired from Google. If you leave your cursor wherever it is, but if you go over to insert an image into the doc, so yep, it's in the drop down there, or yep. Okay, so here they've got the upload button. Great. They also have the by URL anchor thing. We're kind of missing that in the UI. So if you click by URL, we get a modal and it says, what's your URL? Okay. Meghna, Abhi.
Yes. Yes, Steve?
Yeah, that's kind of, does that make sense? I know this is sort of on the fly, but in the filters table, we only have the ability to browse for a file. We need to have the ability to hyperlink to a file.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, yeah, okay. And Google Docs is good inspiration.
Yes. Is there an open issue regarding this, or will it be?
Yeah, I don't think so. But Navendu is the kind of guy, or someone else might want to do it, but he's the kind of guy that would do that fairly fast.
Sure.
Yeah, I can
I'll
open
work
up
on
an
that.
issue.
Sure.
Nice. Now here's the nice thing is, since we're on the topic, if you guys don't mind, can we go to patterns? Oh, guess what? Patterns can also be loaded via URL.
Okay.
Good. The issues are just stacking up now. Now we've got 2 issues. Now, Utkarsh, remind us, applications, same ability there as well. All right. 3. Good. Now, Utkarsh, is there any special consideration that, I know that Mesh, okay, so Meshery as a system will recognize that if you're pointed to github.com, it potentially treats that a little bit differently. Is there anything that we need to account for in terms of the user experience here? If someone gives a URL and it has github.com, is that just gonna, on the back end, it'll just traverse? If it's a directory, it will just traverse the directory and walk it?
No, yeah, so there's a difference. If a user just gives in the repository URL and nothing else, first is that it's going to, it's going to assume that it is supposed to traverse main branch and not master branch. So if your main branch is master branch, then you have to specify that in the thing. And also, if you wanted to recursively go in, you will have to give in /**. That was basically that was to distinguish between if you actually wanted to go inside the repository, or if you just want to get the data at the root level, or just one level down. So those are the 2 considerations that we will have to keep in account. ** for recursion and for recursive traversal, and branch specification. Like you will have to, unless until your main branch is called main, you will have to specify the branch which has to be traversed.
Okay, so good. So for Meghna and potentially Abhi as well, that the UX needs to be a little bit different. Can you regurgitate how you think it would change?
So it depends on, like, once you get the URL, then extra options needs to be shown or something like that. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, so basically, there's a couple of ways to do it. It's sort of like, hey, if they type in github.com, something, detect that and then show them additional fields, or start off with, asking them for either to enter a generic URL or a GitHub one. But that first way might be a little nicer to just auto detect if it's a special URL. And then so the additional things to ask them are, what's the name of the branch? And by default, it would be master, but what's the name of the branch that you'd like to traverse? What's the
recursion, stars?
Yeah, so maybe a checkbox for recursion versus they might just want to load one. It might be only one file that so happens to be on github.com. So they really just want to retrieve the file, not do any recursive stuff, just assume master, that kind of a thing.
In that case, actually, they can also give in path. So that's the third thing the URL accepts. I mean, the endpoint accepts. You can specify path, and if that ends at a if it figures out that it ends on a file node, then it won't actually do recursion even if you ask it to do so. So definitely, a user can actually specify that this is the only file that I'm concerned with. Don't touch anything else. It will actually restrict that.
Okay, assuming that we're also tracking file name of whether it's the filter, the application, or the pattern, really all of these need the same basic support. So there's a display name, which is the filter name. Then there's the file name, the actual name of the binary itself. There's also needs to be a field for the custom configuration. So that YAML that you're editing, Gaurav, that is in fact the custom configuration. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is.
Okay, that's great. So cool. So if we have the file name, we could show that as well. Good. And then Megan, as part of that, we'll want to, inform the user when the file has been uploaded, potentially a little toaster notification, like retrieved or not retrieved. And then hopefully you might need some backend support for a new GraphQL resolver to make sure that there's an active subscription for filters. So when someone uploads them, they would just immediately see it in the table. They wouldn't have to refresh.
So actually, the endpoints do respond back when the loading completes. So even if it's plain HTTP, the front end will get to know that the upload was complete because you can actually transform the output format on the fly also. So.
Oh, okay. Okay, good deal. Might be easier than I was saying then. So Rudraksh, do you want to ask your question?
So we'll be syncing stuff with Git repositories like filters, patterns, and applications. So isn't this where Flux comes in?
Yeah. Yep. So right now, the Git interactions or the file loading interactions that we're having here, these are, well, largely what we're discussing is a one-way interaction where Meshery is just reading from Git, and it's either recursively walking in directory, which is a piece of functionality that we already have, or and it's either doing that authenticated through the user, if the user authenticated OAuth with GitHub when they signed into Meshery Cloud, or if they didn't, then it will just be an anonymous set of HTTP requests that happen, which GitHub ultimately will rate limit. It rate limits both, but it rate limits the anonymous requests much tighter. So yes, you're on the right path mentally, in terms of aligning those things. In this case, the functions are already written here. So this discussion is just in advance of getting to where we would be pushing writing to GitHub. So
I see.
This functionality that we're talking about largely needs to be done across applications, filters, and patterns because it ends up being the same, or they're very similar. Eventually they'll diverge, but this basic level of CRUD operations is pretty similar. Cool. So there is a little bit of a spec that we would do well to write down about, well, about the air gapped concerns, about like, how do we want to best optimize the user experience so that people can easily load maybe from the WASM filters repo, like are there sample repos? Like what does it potentially look like in the future if there is a filter hub that has, well, filters, but maybe also patterns and other things. So something for us to, you know, give some additional thought to. In the meantime, with the issues that are created, I think people can move forward without much issue.
Lee, for the air gap deployments, like even if we are fetching from GitHub or Filter Hub, if a user has an air gapped environment, they can just download the file and then upload it manually, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yep. That's a good, yep. That's actually those instructions, which is pretty simple, is actually something that there's a bank here in Austin that's been asking for air gapped instructions. Like they're okay with whatever they need to do manually. They just need someone to write down what those instructions are. So there's an open issue for that. And it doesn't have to be, we don't have to holistically address it. Like if someone just wants to write down that sentence that Navendu just said, good. There's an open issue. I think there's a branch that's created already. So. Okay. Other conversations, other things. If you go back to the meeting minutes, Gaurav. Okay. So I don't know if it will. So Utkarsh, where are we at with respect to those other pattern components to support, the rest of what we need to know when we go to actually deploy in runtime a filter? The filter chain, the inbound, outbound, all the.
Yeah, so all of those things are, I mean, those particular sections, they are already available. They should be in fact, stable as well as edge release. So what you can do is you can even today basically write a pattern, apply it, and it will actually, and provided you are running a Istio adapter and you have Istio available on your system, on your cluster, that pattern, that filter will get uploaded to. So basically, in terms of patterns for Istio, we have a resource called Envoy filter Istio. You can use that to basically put in any filter that you want in any Envoy proxy of your choice. So we have all of those things.
All right. So gosh, it's back to Gaurav, Meghana, and Abhi, actually. So it sounds like the back end has support for, it has these additional, Utkarsh, maybe you can finish off what I'm trying to say, which is how do they take those components? How do they make use of those capabilities? Use an Rgsf component and display.
So we have endpoints for querying, not querying, but getting all of the workload definitions that Mystery Store has. Mystery Server has a store for capabilities. The endpoint is, I think, /API/OM/workloads. If you would hit that, you would actually get the list of all of the workloads. In there, you would actually find Envoy filter. Envoy filter Istio. There would be a resource named Envoy filter Istio. Just grab that resource. You will find the JSON schema also there. You can actually use that JSON schema to render it Rgsf form, or like you can either do all of these things. Basically, either you can use native Rgsf, or we actually also have in Mesh UI. If someone has noticed, there is a new directory under UI called Mesh, under UI components, that is called Mesh interface or something. And there are actually helper components which you can actually feed in Rgsf schemas to render.
Okay, wait. Oh, okay, very good. Okay, I think you probably lost the rest of everybody else. If they, but yeah.
Under components, there is this Mesh interface, and here this is pattern service form. You can actually use this thing. The reason, probably you would want to use this thing is because first, it actually generates all of the things automatically for you. Second is there are some considerations that we are having right now for Rgsf and like other alternatives for Rgsf. This is actually the wrapper around Rgsf and those kind of things. So basically, if you use this component, it as soon as there are changes in here, if we actually go on and change Rgsf to something else, your component will not have to be changed because you are reusing just a single component. So this component takes in JSON schema, feed it JSON schema, and which you actually got from the endpoint, and the rest of the form would be rendered automatically.
Okay, so Abi, did you get that?
Hello. Yeah, a bit, but yeah, still confused. But I'll rewatch it, and we'll see if there is some problems or confusions. After
Yep.
that, we'll clear it up.
Here, I will say this in the best of ways. Well, good. Let's change your answer so it's like super confident, super. Because if I were you, and I'm not, this is like I have no idea where to start. I have no idea what you're talking about. Like I really wouldn't if I were you. And if you do have some kind of an idea, then good. But let's make sure that you're feeling comfortable. So can we get some specifics down? Utkarsh, you had said there is an endpoint currently that can be queried. It's a registry. There's a capabilities registry in Meshery that the front end can query and interrogate Meshery server and say, what things do you support? What are you capable of? And it retrieves back details about those capabilities. And that's what needs to be represented in the UI.
I have added that endpoint in the meeting minutes. This endpoint can be queried to get a list of workloads. In the workloads, you will actually see workload definitions, which is probably not relevant for this particular use case. In there, you will also see JSON schema, which is a string. Just feed in that JSON schema to the component, and it will actually render the Rgsf form for you. And actually, it will also make sure that it produces right pattern, because that's what we actually need to send to the server so that it can actually do this stuff.
Okay. And it should go under like pattern section, right? Inside the UI.
No, so actually, this is for onward filter, but because the deployment of onward filter is also being taken care of via patterns. So the thing is that internals would look a bit like we are dealing with patterns, but from the point of from UI point of view, it will actually be it will actually be filters. So it will available in filters, but underlying things would be similar to how patterns are being dealt with.
Okay.
So that API, like the hope is that as we go to, we work through documentation of Meshery's REST APIs and its GraphQL APIs, that
it is actually right there. So /API/o, the third one. So this type can workload scope and traits. I'm not sure if that thing is documented, what the type can be, but it could be three things: workload, traits, and scopes.
It absolutely needs documented. So on this is ideally gets heavily used in its current form. I don't know. I wouldn't be able to use it very well. This is better, but who can assist here? Shayatan? Is he still?
Actually, I'll wind this thing off. The reason I'm saying so is because I'm working on this file and it will result in merge conflicts. So I'll just add comments on it while I create PR. So yeah, I'll do it.
Cool. Okay. Okay. Good. To the extent, by the way, since we're talking about this, to the extent that we can, giving examples is really helpful. I think this is an example here, at least for a pattern. This isn't quite an example as much as it's just saying what attributes are available and what type they are. But actually building these out further into examples, really helpful. So is there anyone on the call that thinks they could do that? If you have a pattern loaded, you can retrieve you can either look at the code to see what's supposed to come back, or if you have a pattern loaded, you can just see what actually comes back and help document it for people. So I'm going to work through the list. So Suraj is with us. And Suraj, I understand this may not be part of your focus, but Surya Shankar, is this an uncomfortable thing to work on for you? Or is this something you think?
No, I can do it. I can do it.
Nice. Okay. Nice. Folks who've been working on this a bit, Shayatan Bose, who's on the call, he's been doing some of this. Piyush Singaria.
This response can be found that in localhost 901 docs. So if we run measure locally, I think we can get the correct response of this endpoint from there.
Yeah, Shayatan, I can't hear you.
Oh, the localhost 901/docs. I think if we run that thing locally, measure locally, then I think we can get the correct responses of these endpoints.
Nice. That makes sense. Yeah, if you're running mesh. Do you, wait, /docs. So then you're saying there'll be an instance of this documentation? Or are you saying?
The Swagger docs, we get the response from there. It's the Swagger doc.
Oh, I see. Okay. Does it work for you?
Yeah, if we run that locally, if we run that make run local, then I think it will work. For now, if we run it on machine, I think there is a problem that Barik is solving, I think, on the Docker part, and the Swagger YAML is not connected. So I think it is only visible to the make run local or make run first for the machine.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Of the times that so hopefully when his PR lands, you'll be able to see a Swagger.
Yeah, that icon, that's docs. You got that icon, right? That is the endpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah, that icon. I think it's not visible if we run measure SQL system start or /measure system start. It will not load here, but it will load in make run first or make run local.
Makes sense. Cool. My mesh tree is starting up, but I also recognize that we're just at the top of the hour. So to do a brief recap, who's not quite feeling comfortable? So Meghana, Abhi, and it turns out Surya Shankar as well. Surya Shankar, certainly for patterns, I think that's feasible, but we definitely want to get them for the rest. Some of them are going to be easier than others. So maybe for now, we'll start with patterns. If you can get the others like this, that would be great. So Meghana, Abhi, questions yet?
And no questions from me right now. But when I will start working on it, like there will be a lot more. So for now, I'm empty. So no questions.
Okay, fair enough.
It's same situation for me too. So I just need to go through it. So once I do,
Okay,
I'll,
yeah,
I'll let you know if I have questions.
good. Yeah, it sounds like both of you have a sense of where to start though. So you're comfortable to like start and then, okay. And Surya Shankar, same thing. Are you good?
Yeah, like I'll have to look through it. But I guess like if I can see other examples, I can do it.
Sayatan, are you gonna to have a chat with Surya Shankar?
Yes, I would like to collaborate with him to work on this too.
Okay, nice. Are you wait a second, you guys about to become friends? Is that what's gonna happen here? Good. Good. Okay. Navendu, anything else?
No.
Okay. Rudraksh, Rudkarsh, we're good.
Yep.
Cool. Gaurav, did we, so I know Megan is taking on the import by URL, but and Avi is taking on the like runtime deployment, trying to show additional, the additional sequence of steps. When someone clicks on deploy, he'll be interrogating this API. But for you, Gaurav, so Rudraksh, you're taking on the loading of those filters, at least the bundling of them.
Yeah, like a few sample filters, bundling them in the Docker image in the build process.
And then Utkarsh, when those get bundled though, they'll need to get registered. So is that a subsequent conversation we should have?
I'm not sure if I got that. What is that?
Well, if literally Rudraksh grabs the binary filters files, builds them into the Docker image, Meshri's server Docker image, good, they're resident and locally available. But for them to be registered into Meshri's database, that's probably
Yeah, that will be us. That's what I was actually saying, that what you can do is just when it boots up, read through stuff. It could be from file system, which I think the current idea is that it will be basically present in the image in the container when we actually create the image. It can read through it and then just put it into the database of the local provider.
okay. It's good. Probably a fairly lightweight design spec, but yeah, good. Gaurav, are you empty? Or did we have one for you?
I'll get the filter configuration schema up there in the UI.
Nice. Okay.
Lee, hello Lee, can I share my screen once? The thing I was talking about. I can show you what I was talking about.
Okay. Sure.
So, this was the thing I was talking about. Like we can get the response from it. We upload a file over here. We can get the response what we are talking about. I think this can help to write that thing in a better way.
Cool. So Surya Shankar, does that help a little bit? If you're running Meshri local.
Yeah, I'm currently on the same like link. I'm trying it out locally, but right now I'm on the docs page.
Why does this look better than what we have on the docs page?
This looks better because like there are certain things which we can perform here. Like if we want to collapse this whole pattern thing, we can just collapse it and it will just go. So the entire pattern endpoints are listed under a single.
Yeah,
what to
but
say?
why are we not literally just using the same?
I think the issue is that here it is post swagger or something which is after rendering this, so it's very dynamic. I think it's a React application. I forgot, but there it's a JQuery renderer, I think, which pretty much takes all of the fanciness out of it. So
Yeah.
probably that could be the reason.
We might want to consider that certainly like prominently on the docs page, that we would suggest to people that if they run Meshry locally and they want to have an interactive environment, that they can do so by doing what Shayatan has just done. And at some point, like we might just want to publish this as its own thing or something. We need somebody, we figure that out. It's not that. Okay. Cool. Okay. Anybody have anything else? We're all good to go. Cool. Good. Thanks. See you guys next week. Same time, guys and gals.
Bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye. All.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.